Maria Santos spent the next 3 weeks digging deep into James Washington's case. She arrived at her office early each morning and stayed late into the evening. Her desk was covered with papers, documents, and legal books. She knew that winning this case would require finding every piece of evidence possible. The first thing Maria did was request all of James's employment records from Morrison Construction. The company's lawyers sent over a box of files, but Maria suspected they were holding back important information. She filed a motion with the court demanding access to all personnel records for the past 5 years. Maria also began interviewing James's co-workers. This was the hardest part because most people were afraid to speak against their employer. She met with workers in coffee shops and restaurants away from the construction site. Many of them were nervous and looked over their shoulders while they talked. The first person she interviewed was Robert Martinez. He had worked at Morrison Construction for 6 years as a plumber. Robert was hesitant at first, but eventually opened up about what he had seen. Tom Morrison treats different people different ways, Robert told Maria as they sat in a small diner downtown. The white guys get the good assignments and the overtime hours. The rest of us get whatever is left over. Can you give me specific examples? Maria asked while taking notes. Last year when they needed someone to supervise the hospital project, Tom picked his nephew Danny, even though James knew that job better than anyone. James had worked on 2 other hospital jobs, but Danny had never done anything that complicated. Maria wrote down every detail. She needed specific incidents that showed a pattern of discrimination. Did Tom Morrison ever make comments about race or ethnicity? Robert looked around the diner nervously. He would make jokes during safety meetings. Like he would say that some people need extra supervision or that certain types of workers are not reliable. Everyone knew what he meant. Would you be willing to testify about this in court? Robert was quiet for a long time. Finally he nodded. My kids go to school with James's daughters. They are good kids and James is a good man. If testifying will help him, then I will do it. The next person Maria interviewed was Carlos Hernandez. He had worked as an electrician at Morrison Construction for 4 years. Carlos had his own story about being passed over for promotions. 2 years ago I applied to be a crew leader, Carlos explained. I had more experience than the guy who got the job, but Tom said I was not ready for that kind of responsibility. The person who got promoted was Tom's brother-in-law. Maria was starting to see a clear pattern. Family members and friends were getting promoted while qualified minority workers were being ignored. Did anyone else apply for that crew leader position? Yes. There was another guy named Marcus Johnson. He is black and had been there longer than me. He did not get the job either. Marcus quit about 6 months later. He said he was tired of being treated like a second-class employee. Maria made a note to track down Marcus Johnson. His testimony could be very important for James's case. She also interviewed Sarah Chun, who worked as a project manager. Sarah was different from the other workers because she had an office job and worked closely with Tom Morrison. Sarah had been uncomfortable with the workplace atmosphere for a long time. I have witnessed Tom Morrison make inappropriate comments many times, Sarah told Maria during their meeting. During staff meetings, he would make jokes about different ethnic groups. When I first started working there, I thought he was just trying to be funny, but over time, I realized it was more serious than that. Did you ever say anything to him about these comments? I tried to once, but he brushed me off. He said I was being too sensitive and that everyone knew he was just joking around. But the minority workers were not laughing. I could see it made them uncomfortable, Sarah also told Maria about a conversation she had overheard between Tom Morrison and his nephew Danny. I was walking past Tom's office and I heard them talking about the senior electrician position. Tom said he wanted to keep leadership roles within the family. He said that outside people might not understand how things work at Morrison Construction. This was exactly the kind of evidence Maria needed. It showed that Tom Morrison had already decided to give the job to his nephew before the interviews even took place. While Maria was interviewing witnesses, she also discovered something important in the company records. Over the past 5 years, 3 other minority workers had filed internal complaints about discrimination. All 3 complaints had been dismissed by the company's Human Resources Department. The first complaint was from Marcus Johnson, the electrician that Carlos had mentioned. Marcus had written a detailed letter describing how he was passed over for promotions despite his qualifications. The Human Resources manager had concluded that Marcus was not a good fit for leadership roles. The second complaint came from Antonio Rodriguez, a carpenter who claimed his supervisor made racist jokes and gave him the most difficult assignments. The company said they investigated the complaint but found no evidence of wrongdoing. The third complaint was from Denise Washington. No relation to James, she worked in the company office and claimed she was paid less than her white co-workers who did the same job. The company said her salary was based on experience and performance. Maria realized that these complaints showed Morrison Construction had a long history of discrimination problems. The company had not taken any of the complaints seriously and had not made any changes to prevent future issues. She decided to track down the 3 workers who had filed complaints. Marcus Johnson was now working for a different construction company across town. When Maria called him, he was eager to help with James's case. "I am glad someone is finally standing up to Tom Morrison," Marcus told her. "I should have fought harder when it happened to me, but I needed the job and could not afford to lose it. Now I have steady work somewhere else, and I can tell the truth about what goes on at Morrison Construction." Antonio Rodriguez had moved to another state, but Maria was able to reach him by phone. He also agreed to testify about his experiences. Denise Washington was harder to find, but Maria eventually located her working at a small accounting firm. Denise was initially reluctant to get involved because she was worried about her current job. But when Maria explained how her testimony could help other workers, she agreed to participate. Maria also hired a private investigator to look into Tom Morrison's background. The investigator discovered that Morrison had been sued twice before by former employees. Both cases had been settled out of court with confidentiality agreements. This meant the details could not be made public, but it showed that James's case was not an isolated incident. As Maria gathered more evidence, she began to feel confident about their chances in court. The pattern of discrimination was clear, and she had credible witnesses who were willing to testify. But she also knew that Morrison Construction would not give up easily. The company hired a large law firm that specialized in defending corporations against discrimination claims. Their lawyers were expensive and experienced. They would challenge every piece of evidence and try to discredit every witness. Maria met with James regularly to update him on their progress. Each time she saw him, he looked more tired and stressed. The atmosphere at work had become very difficult for him. "Some of the guys are treating me like I am a troublemaker," James told her. "They are worried that if I win my case it will cause problems for everyone. That kind of retaliation is illegal," Maria explained. "If anyone at work is treating you badly because you filed this complaint, that is another violation of the law." "I do not want to file more complaints," James said. "I just want this to be over so I can get back to doing my job." Maria understood his frustration, but she knew they had to see the case through to the end. The Morrison Construction legal team struck back hard and fast. Maria Santos found a thick envelope waiting on her desk one Monday morning. Inside were dozens of documents that painted James Washington in a negative light. The company lawyers had dug up every small mistake James had made during his 8 years of employment. They found a time when James was 15 minutes late to work because his car broke down. They found a day when he forgot to wear his safety glasses in a non-dangerous area. They even found a complaint from a coworker 3 years ago saying James had been unfriendly during lunch break. Maria spread the papers across her desk and shook her head. This was exactly what she had expected. When companies could not defend their actions, they tried to destroy the reputation of the person suing them. She called James to warn him about what was coming. His voice sounded worried when she explained the situation. "They are going to make me look like a bad employee," James said. "What if the judge believes their lies?" "James, these are not lies exactly, but they are not the whole truth either. Every worker makes small mistakes over 8 years. The important thing is your overall record, which is excellent. We will show the judge that these minor issues do not change the fact that you were the best candidate for the promotion." But Maria knew this was just the beginning. The company lawyers were smart, and they would use every trick they could think of. A week later, Maria received another surprise. Morrison Construction claimed they had found new evidence that James had been dishonest on his original job application. 8 years ago, they said he had lied about his experience at a previous job. Maria immediately called the company where James had worked before Morrison Construction. She spoke to the manager, who remembered James clearly. James Washington was an excellent employee, the manager told her. He worked here for 2 years and never had any problems. "I do not know what Morrison Construction is talking about, but James was always honest with us." Maria realized the company was now making up false accusations. She filed a motion with the court accusing Morrison Construction of filing fraudulent documents. But she knew this kind of legal fighting would slow down their case and cost more money. Meanwhile, James was having serious problems at work. His co-workers were treating him differently since news of the lawsuit had spread through the company. Some people avoided him completely, while others made rude comments when supervisors were not around. "Yesterday someone wrote something nasty on my toolbox," James told Maria during one of their meetings. "And when I went to the supply room to get materials, someone had hidden my usual supplies. Have you told your supervisor about this harassment?" "I tried to, but Tom Morrison just said that workplace tensions were normal and I should focus on doing my job instead of causing problems." Maria knew this retaliation was illegal, but proving it would be difficult. The people harassing James were careful not to do anything in front of witnesses who would testify against them. She decided to focus on strengthening their main case instead of getting distracted by these side issues. Maria scheduled depositions with key witnesses. A deposition was a formal interview where people had to answer questions under oath before the trial began. The first deposition was with Tom Morrison himself. Maria sat across from him in a conference room at the courthouse. Morrison was a heavy-set man in his 50s with gray hair and small eyes. He wore an expensive suit and had 2 lawyers sitting beside him. "Mr. Morrison, how long have you been running Morrison Construction?" Maria began. "I have been the general manager for 12 years since my father retired." "How many people work for your company?" "We have about 40 employees, including office staff and field workers," Maria asked him about the promotion process and how decisions were made. Morrison claimed that promotions were based purely on merit and that family relationships did not influence his choices. "So you are saying that the fact that Danny Morrison is your nephew had nothing to do with him getting the senior electrician position?" "That is correct. Danny earned that promotion through his hard work and leadership potential. But James Washington had more experience and better performance reviews than your nephew." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Experience is not the only factor we consider. We also look at leadership skills and how well someone fits with our company culture." "What do you mean by company culture?" "We are a family business and we value loyalty and teamwork." Maria pressed him about the comments witnesses had heard him make about different ethnic groups. Morrison denied making any inappropriate statements. "I treat all my employees fairly regardless of their background," he insisted. "If anyone felt discriminated against, they should have come to me directly. But several employees did file complaints with your human resources department, and those complaints were dismissed." Morrison's lawyers objected to the question, but Maria had made her point. The deposition continued for 3 hours, and Morrison grew more defensive as time went on. Next, Maria deposed Danny Morrison, the nephew who had gotten the promotion that James wanted. Danny was 28 years old and seemed nervous about answering questions under oath. "How long have you worked at Morrison Construction?" Maria asked. 3 years next month. "What was your experience with electrical work before you started there?" "I went to trade school and worked for another company for about 6 months. So when you applied for the senior electrician position, you had less than 4 years of total experience?" "Yes, but I learned quickly, and my uncle, my supervisor, said I showed leadership potential." Danny admitted that he had needed help from other electricians, including James, on several complicated projects. When Maria asked him about his qualifications compared to James, he became flustered. "I know James has more experience, but experience is not everything," Danny said. "Sometimes fresh ideas are more important than just doing things the old way." Maria also deposed several other Morrison Construction employees. Some of them supported the company's version of events, but others confirmed what Maria's witnesses had told her about discriminatory comments and unfair treatment. The most important deposition was with Robert Martinez, the plumber who had agreed to testify for James. Robert was clearly nervous, but he told the truth about what he had witnessed. "I heard Tom Morrison make comments about different types of workers many times," Robert testified. "He would say things like some people are not suited for leadership roles or that certain groups of workers need more supervision." "Did you understand these comments to be about race or ethnicity?" "Yes, it was obvious what he meant. All the minority workers understood what he was saying." Morrison's lawyers tried to discredit Robert by asking about his own work record and suggesting he was biased against the company. But Robert stood firm in his testimony. While the depositions were taking place, Maria also worked on gathering documentary evidence. She found company emails that showed Tom Morrison discussing the promotion with his nephew before the position was even posted. She also found payroll records that showed white employees consistently receiving better assignments and more overtime hours. One particularly damaging piece of evidence was a company memo from 2 years earlier. In the memo, Tom Morrison had written that the company needed to maintain its traditional values and workplace culture. While the language was subtle, Maria believed it showed Morrison's bias against diversity. The case was scheduled to go to trial in 2 months. Maria spent long hours preparing her arguments and organizing her evidence. She practiced her opening statement and prepared James for his testimony, but the stress was taking a toll on everyone involved. James was having trouble sleeping, and his relationship with his co-workers continued to deteriorate. Maria was working 16-hour days and barely had time to eat proper meals. The community was also watching the case closely. Local newspapers had picked up the story, and people were talking about it at churches and community centers. Some people supported James while others believed he was just a troublemaker trying to get money from his employer. As the trial date approached, Maria felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This case was about more than just James Washington. It was about whether working people could stand up against discrimination and expect justice from the legal system. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November. Maria Santos arrived at the courthouse an hour early to prepare her materials and calm her nerves. She had been working on this case for 6 months, and today would determine whether all her effort had been worth it. James Washington sat in the front row wearing his best suit. His 2 daughters, Keisha and Maya, were beside him along with his ex-wife, Linda. Despite their divorce, Linda had come to support James during this important day. The girls looked nervous but proud of their father for standing up for what was right. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock. She was known as a fair judge who listened carefully to both sides before making decisions. Maria had appeared before Judge Hendricks many times and respected her knowledge of employment law. The jury consisted of 12 people from the local community. There were 7 women, 5 men of different ages and backgrounds. Maria had spent days helping to select jurors who would be fair and open-minded about discrimination issues. Morrison Construction had hired 3 expensive lawyers from a big law firm downtown. The lead attorney was Richard Sterling, a man in his 60s who specialized in defending companies against discrimination lawsuits. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried himself with confidence. Maria stood up to give her opening statement to the jury. She had practiced this speech dozens of times, but her heart was still beating fast as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, James Washington worked faithfully for Morrison Construction for 8 years. He was an excellent employee who never caused trouble and always did his job well. When a promotion opportunity came up, James was clearly the most qualified candidate. But instead of promoting James, the company gave the job to the boss's nephew, who had much less experience. Maria walked closer to the jury box so she could look each juror in the eyes. This case is about fairness. It is about a hard-working man who deserved a chance to advance in his career, but was denied that chance because of his race. The evidence will show that Morrison Construction has a pattern of discriminating against minority workers, and that James Washington was just the latest victim. She spent 20 minutes outlining the evidence she would present, including witness testimony, company documents, and expert analysis of the promotion decision. When Maria finished, Richard Sterling stood up to give Morrison Construction's opening statement. He was smooth and persuasive as he spoke to the jury. "This case is not about discrimination," Sterling began. "This is about a disgruntled employee who did not get a promotion he wanted and is now trying to blame his employer instead of accepting responsibility for his own shortcomings." Sterling claimed that Danny Morrison had been promoted because he showed leadership potential and fresh ideas. He said the company had legitimate business reasons for their decision that had nothing to do with race. James Washington was a good worker, but being a good worker does not automatically entitle someone to a promotion. Companies must make difficult decisions about who is best suited for leadership roles, and sometimes those decisions disappoint people who think they deserve something they did not earn. After the opening statements, Maria called her first witness. Robert Martinez walked to the witness stand looking nervous but determined. Maria had spent hours preparing him for this moment. "Mr. Martinez, how long have you worked at Morrison Construction?" Maria asked. 6 years as a plumber. During that time, did you ever hear Tom Morrison make comments about race or ethnicity? Yes, many times during safety meetings and other gatherings. Can you give the jury a specific example? Robert took a deep breath before answering. One time Tom Morrison said that certain types of people are not reliable workers and need extra supervision. Everyone knew he was talking about Black and Hispanic employees. Sterling objected to the question, claiming it was hearsay, but Judge Hendricks allowed Robert to continue his testimony. "Did you witness the treatment James Washington received compared to other employees?" James was always given the hardest assignments and had to work more overtime than the white guys. But when promotion time came, he was always passed over. During cross-examination, Sterling tried to make Robert look like an unreliable witness. He asked about Robert's own work record and suggested he was lying to help his friend James. "Mr. Martinez, is it not true that you were written up for being late to work several times last year?" "I was late a few times because my wife was in the hospital, but I always made up the hours." "And is it not true that you are angry at Morrison Construction because you did not get a raise you requested?" "I think all the workers deserve fair treatment, but this is not about me. This is about what happened to James." Maria called several other witnesses, including Sarah Chun, the project manager who had overheard Tom Morrison talking about keeping leadership roles within the family. Sarah was a strong witness because she was not a close friend of James and had no obvious reason to lie. Carlos Hernandez testified about his own experience being passed over for promotions despite his qualifications. His testimony helped establish a pattern of discrimination at the company. The most powerful witness was Marcus Johnson, the former Morrison construction employee who had filed his own discrimination complaint years earlier. Marcus described how he had been treated unfairly and eventually forced to quit his job. "I loved construction work, but I could not stay at a place where I was never going to be treated with respect," Marcus told the jury. "What happened to James Washington is exactly what happened to me and probably other workers too." On the third day of trial, Maria called James Washington to testify on his own behalf. James walked slowly to the witness stand and placed his hand on the Bible to swear to tell the truth. "Mr. Washington, please tell the jury about your work history at Morrison Construction." James spoke in a clear, steady voice about his 8 years with the company. He described his excellent performance reviews, his safety awards, and his additional training. He explained how he had mentored newer employees and taken on extra responsibilities. "When the senior electrician position opened up, did you believe you were qualified for the job?" "Yes, I had more experience than anyone else who applied. I knew all the electrical systems and had trained most of the newer guys. The previous senior electrician even told me I would be perfect for the job." "How did you feel when you learned that Danny Morrison got the promotion instead of you?" James paused for a moment before answering. "I felt hurt and angry. I had given that company 8 years of my life and always been loyal. I could not understand how someone with less experience could be chosen over me unless it had to do with race." Sterling spent 2 hours cross-examining James, trying to find weaknesses in his story. He brought up every small mistake James had made during his employment and suggested that James was not promotion material. "Mr. Washington, is it not true that you were sometimes difficult to work with? I tried to get along with everyone, but I also stood up for myself when I was treated unfairly. And is it not true that you filed this lawsuit because you were angry about not getting promoted?" "I filed this lawsuit because what happened to me was wrong, and I did not want it to happen to other people." By the end of the 4th day, Maria had presented all her evidence and witnesses. She felt confident that the jury had heard enough testimony to understand that James had been discriminated against. But she also knew that Sterling and the Morrison construction lawyers would fight hard during their defense presentation. The case would continue for several more days as Morrison Construction presented their side of the story. The outcome was still uncertain, but Maria believed that justice and truth were on their side. The courtroom was packed with people on the 5th day of the trial. Word had spread throughout the community about James Washington's case against Morrison Construction. Workers from other construction companies had come to watch. Civil rights activists sat in the back rows. Local reporters scribbled notes as the proceedings continued. Morrison Construction began presenting their defense. Richard Sterling called Tom Morrison to the witness stand first. Morrison wore an expensive dark blue suit and looked confident as he walked to the front of the courtroom. "Mr. Morrison, please tell the jury about your decision to promote Danny Morrison to senior electrician," Sterling began. "It was a difficult choice because we had several qualified candidates. But Danny showed exceptional leadership qualities and brought fresh ideas to our team. He also understood our company culture and values." "Did James Washington's race play any role in your decision?" "Absolutely not. I have worked with people of all backgrounds throughout my career. I judge employees based on their abilities and potential, not their skin color." Sterling spent an hour asking Morrison questions designed to make him look like a fair employer who made promotion decisions based on merit. Morrison denied making any discriminatory comments and claimed his company treated all workers equally. When Maria cross-examined Morrison, she was ready with specific evidence to challenge his claims. "Mr. Morrison, you testified that you never made comments about race or ethnicity. But several witnesses heard you say that certain types of people are not suited for leadership roles. Do you remember making that statement?" "I may have made general comments about leadership, but I was not referring to race." "What did you mean by certain types of people if not race?" Morrison looked uncomfortable. I meant people who do not show initiative or teamwork skills. Maria showed Morrison copies of company emails where he discussed the promotion with his nephew before the position was even posted. The emails showed that Morrison had already decided to give Danny the job, regardless of other candidates. Mr. Morrison, this email is dated 2 weeks before you posted the job opening. In it, you tell Danny that the senior electrician position will be perfect for him. How could you know that before interviewing other candidates? I was just encouraging my nephew to apply. I still considered all applicants fairly, but you had already promised him the job, had you not? Sterling objected. Judge Hendricks allowed the question. Morrison struggled to explain why he had made commitments to Danny before reviewing other applications. Maria also confronted Morrison about the pattern of discrimination complaints at his company. She showed him records of 3 previous complaints from minority workers that had been dismissed without proper investigation. Mr. Morrison, in 5 years, 3 different minority employees filed discrimination complaints against your company. Do you see a pattern here? Those complaints were investigated and found to be without merit. Investigated by whom? Our human resources manager. The same human resources manager who reports directly to you. Morrison realized he was trapped. The jury could see that his company had not taken discrimination complaints seriously. After Morrison finished testifying, Sterling called Danny Morrison to defend his promotion. Danny looked nervous as he sat in the witness chair. He was much younger than the other witnesses and seemed intimidated by the formal courtroom setting. Danny, please tell the jury about your qualifications for the senior electrician position. I graduated from trade school with high grades and worked hard to learn everything I could at Morrison Construction. My supervisor said I had natural leadership abilities. Did you know that James Washington had more experience than you? Yes, but I brought different skills to the job. I was good with computers and had ideas about modernizing our work methods. During cross-examination, Maria asked Danny specific technical questions about electrical work. It became clear that Danny still needed help with many complex tasks that James could handle easily. Danny, when you encountered a difficult wiring problem on the hospital project, who did you ask for help? I consulted with several experienced electricians, including James Washington. Yes, James helped me figure out some of the more complicated systems. So James was teaching you how to do the job you were promoted to supervise. Danny realized how bad this sounded. James was one of several people who helped me learn. Maria showed that Danny had needed assistance on multiple projects while James had been working independently for years. The jury could see that experience and skill had not been the real factors. In the promotion decision, Sterling called several Morrison Construction employees who testified that the company treated workers fairly. But Maria noticed that all these witnesses were white employees who had received promotions or raises in recent years. During her cross-examination of these witnesses, Maria asked pointed questions about what they had observed regarding minority workers. Mr. Johnson, you testified that Morrison Construction is a fair employer. In your 6 years there, how many black or Hispanic workers have been promoted to supervisor positions? I am not sure of the exact number. Can you name even one? The witness thought for a long time. I cannot think of any specific names right now, so. In 6 years, you cannot recall a single minority worker being promoted to a leadership position. Well, there might have been some, but I do not remember. This pattern repeated with other company witnesses. None of them could identify minority workers who had advanced to better positions at Morrison Construction. On the 7th day of trial, both sides presented their closing arguments. Sterling went first, trying to convince the jury that Morrison Construction had made a legitimate business decision. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a company's right to choose the best candidate for a job. Danny Morrison was promoted because he showed leadership potential and fit well with the company culture. The plaintiff wants you to believe this was about race, but the evidence shows it was about qualifications and merit. Sterling argued that James was a good worker, but not management material. He claimed the discrimination complaints were from disgruntled employees who could not accept that they were not promotion-worthy. Companies cannot be forced to promote every employee who wants advancement. Sometimes people do not get what they want, and that does not mean discrimination occurred. When Maria gave her closing argument, she spoke directly to the jury's sense of fairness and justice. James Washington dedicated 8 years of his life to Morrison Construction. He worked hard, followed the rules, and earned excellent performance reviews. When a promotion opportunity arose, he was clearly the most qualified candidate. But he did not get the job because Tom Morrison had already decided to give it to his nephew. Maria walked closer to the jury box as she continued. This case is about more than just James Washington. It is about whether hardworking people can expect to be judged by their abilities rather than their race. The evidence has shown you a pattern of discrimination at Morrison Construction that goes back years. She reminded the jury of the witness, testimony, company emails, and promotion records that all pointed to discriminatory practices. James Washington is not asking for special treatment. He is asking for equal treatment. He is asking for the same opportunities that white workers take for granted. The law requires employers to make promotion decisions based on merit, not race, and Morrison Construction violated that law. Maria concluded by asking the jury to send a message that discrimination would not be tolerated in their community. Your verdict in this case will determine whether companies can continue to discriminate against minority workers or whether justice will finally prevail. James Washington and his family are counting on you to do the right thing. After closing arguments, Judge Hendricks gave the jury detailed instructions about the law and sent them to deliberate. The waiting began for everyone involved in this important case. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. Maria Santos paced the hallways of the courthouse, checking her phone every few minutes for updates from the court clerk. James Washington sat quietly in the waiting area with his daughters and ex-wife. The stress was visible on everyone's faces as they waited for the verdict that would determine the outcome of 8 months of legal battle. On Wednesday afternoon at 3:15, the court clerk announced that the jury had reached a decision. Maria felt her heart racing as she walked back into the courtroom. James and his family took their seats in the front row. Morrison Construction's lawyers sat at their table, looking confident but tense. Judge Hendricks entered the courtroom and asked the jury foreman to stand. The foreman was an older black man who worked as a supervisor at the local post office. He held a folded piece of paper in his hands as he prepared to read the verdict. In the matter of James Washington versus Morrison Construction Company, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff James Washington. We find that Morrison Construction Company did discriminate against Mr. Washington based on his race when they denied him the promotion to senior electrician. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps and whispers. James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His daughter Keisha reached over and squeezed his hand. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew this was just the beginning. The jury foreman continued reading. We award Mr. Washington back pay in the amount of $22,000, representing the salary difference he would have earned in the senior electrician position. We also award him front pay of $38,000 representing future lost earnings. Judge Hendricks asked if there were any other damages the jury wanted to award. The foreman nodded and continued. We also award Mr. Washington $50,000 in compensatory damages for the emotional distress and humiliation he suffered due to the discrimination. The total award was $110,000. It was not a huge amount compared to some discrimination cases, but it was enough to make a statement that Morrison Construction's actions had consequences. After the jury was dismissed, Judge Hendricks addressed both legal teams. She scheduled a hearing for the following week to discuss additional remedies beyond the monetary award. Under federal law, James could also request changes to company policies and his reinstatement to a position equivalent to the one he should have received. Outside the courthouse, James was surrounded by supporters and reporters. He spoke briefly about the verdict and what it meant to him and his family. "This was never about getting rich or punishing anyone," James said, as cameras recorded his words. "This was about being treated fairly and making sure other workers do not have to go through what I went through. I hope this sends a message that discrimination is wrong and will not be tolerated." Maria stood beside James as he spoke to the media. She was proud of the work they had done together and the justice they had achieved. But she also knew that winning the case was only the first step in a longer process. The following week, Judge Hendricks held the remedies hearing to determine what other actions Morrison Construction would have to take. Maria argued that the company needed to implement new policies and training to prevent future discrimination. "Your Honor, the evidence showed that Morrison Construction has a pattern of discriminatory practices going back several years. Simply paying monetary damages will not solve the underlying problems that led to this case." Maria requested that the court order Morrison Construction to develop written promotion policies that would ensure fair treatment of all employees. She also asked for mandatory diversity training for all supervisors and managers. Richard Sterling argued that his client had already learned from this case and would make necessary changes voluntarily. He claimed that court-ordered remedies were unnecessary and would hurt the company's ability to operate efficiently. Judge Hendricks considered both arguments before issuing her ruling. She ordered Morrison Construction to pay the monetary damages within 30 days. She also required the company to develop new promotion policies within 60 days and to provide copies of those policies to the court. Most importantly, Judge Hendricks ordered that James Washington be promoted to senior electrician immediately with full back pay and benefits. If Morrison Construction chose not to promote James, they would have to pay him additional damages equivalent to the senior electrician salary for the next 3 years. Tom Morrison's face was red with anger as he heard the judge's ruling. He whispered angrily to his lawyers, but there was nothing they could do. The decision was final unless they chose to appeal to a higher court. A week later, James returned to work at Morrison Construction as the new senior electrician. The atmosphere was tense, but most of his co-workers congratulated him on his victory. Some people who had avoided him during the lawsuit now treated him with new respect. Tom Morrison was forced to announce James's promotion at the weekly safety meeting. He did so without enthusiasm, but he followed the court's order. Danny Morrison was reassigned to a regular electrician position, which was embarrassing for him but legally necessary. The changes at Morrison Construction went beyond just James's promotion. The company hired a human resources consultant to develop new policies for hiring and promotion decisions. They also began conducting quarterly reviews of employee advancement to ensure fair treatment. Other construction companies in the area took notice of the verdict and began examining their own practices. Some companies voluntarily implemented diversity training and promotion policies to avoid similar lawsuits. James's case also inspired other workers who had experienced discrimination to speak up about their treatment. 3 more discrimination complaints were filed against different companies within 6 months of James's victory. The local chapter of the NAACP used James's case as an example in their community education programs. They invited James to speak at several events about the importance of standing up for civil rights, even when it seemed difficult or risky. 6 months after the trial, James had settled into his new role as senior electrician. He was finally doing the job he had been qualified for years earlier. His increased salary allowed him to help his daughters with college expenses and to move into a better apartment. Maria continued working as a public defender, taking on new cases involving workplace discrimination and other civil rights issues. James's case had given her a reputation as an effective advocate for workers' rights. Other attorneys began referring similar cases to her. The victory also had a personal impact on James's family. His daughters were proud of their father for fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult. They learned that standing up against injustice was worth the struggle, even if the outcome was uncertain. Keisha Washington wrote an essay about her father's case for her college application. She explained how watching him fight discrimination had inspired her to study law, so she could help other people seek justice. She was accepted to several universities and planned to follow in Maria's footsteps as a civil rights attorney. Maya Washington also found inspiration in her father's victory. She became more active in her high school's diversity club and began speaking to younger students about the importance of treating everyone fairly regardless of their background. A year after the trial, Morrison Construction had transformed into a more diverse and inclusive workplace. The court-ordered changes had forced Tom Morrison to confront his biases and create a fairer system for all employees. 3 minority workers received promotions in the following year, which had never happened before in the company's history. James Washington's courage to stand up against discrimination had created positive changes that went far beyond his individual case. His fight for justice had made life better for many other workers and had sent a clear message that discrimination would not be tolerated in their community. The legal system had worked as it was designed to work. Truth and justice had prevailed over prejudice and unfairness. James Washington could finally hold his head high, knowing that he had made a difference, not just for himself but for future generations of workers who deserved equal treatment and opportunity.